right, Michael. So I thought we'd take a look at the internet weather for this week. And this is the most probe ports. We have Telnet, we have your SMB file server sharing, which a lot of the WannaCry stuff is in here, SSH. So these two, a lot of these IoT devices, right? We know that there's a lot of activity in Telnet and SSH compromising a lot of these IoT devices out on the internet. Microsoft SQL Server, Remote Desktop Protocol. 81 TCP is probably related to the go-ahead web server. Some web traffic, DNS. This might be looking for more DNS servers for use in DNS reflection attack activity. The 8088, I didn't get a chance to look into. It has crept up from where it was in below the top 10. I think Matt might have talked about it last week. You know, I think it might be a little bit better to focus in on the ones that I think are probably a little bit more related to botnet-related activity. So there's a couple of things in here that I highlighted. We talked about a couple of these already. We're not going to bring charts up on every single one. 5555 TCP we talked about quite a bit over the past few months. This is the Android debugger port that gets left open on some of these Android devices. 81 TCP again, go-ahead web server. We know there's an active vulnerability against that. We're going to take a look at these three, 5431, 8080, and 8081. This one I found more interesting than the others. 5431 we'll take a look at real quickly. This one has really bothered me. I was talking to you this morning about it. This is some activity that's really strange. What happens is about every 3 to 4 days, and it's not really consistently regular, because you'll see its spacing is a little bit different. Sometimes it's tighter, sometimes it's not. There's bigger gaps, and it's really hard to pin any kind of regularity to it other than it's really bursty, spiky, and then it drops off really quickly, which is not like traditional botnets operate. Normally they'll start and they'll decay, you know, a little bit more gradually. This decay is like boom, they just stop scanning altogether. So like I said, it doesn't conform to our normal botnet scanning patterns. Too short of a duration, too fast of a cutoff in my opinion. And to get 70, 80,000 devices to all start scanning like so precisely at the same time is really curious to me. Even with like clocks that are probably skewed slightly out of sync and whatnot, it's interesting.
Is it possible that you would avoid detection by doing it in this, do it for a while, stop, do it for a while?
It's not avoiding my detection. But to me, it's even more strange because it's so bursty like that and then disappears. Yeah. The other thing that's really kind of interesting to me about this, and it's a little hard for me to represent this perfectly, because the top one is the number of scan sources scanning to port 5431. What I noticed about these flows when I actually looked at them, the source port on those flows is fixed to 6. Port 6.
Low port number.
That's a very low port number. It's very unusual. So they're sending these packets with a fixed source port of 6 TCP, destination port 5431. So you can kind of see that these line up, these time frames all kind of line up here with where the same spikes occur for this thing. It's just that the volumes are a little bit different because we're measuring on a different thing here versus, you know, number of unique scan sources versus number of flows. The other thing I thought was interesting when I did look at these, many, if not all of them, do have 23 TCP telnet open. However, if you try to connect to it, it immediately hangs up on you with no prompt.
Which is not unusual
Which is
behavior.
not normal behavior.
Right.
I have seen that with devices when they're too busy and they have too many connections already to them. They can't handle another telnet connection, so they just drop you. I don't know that that's the case here though. So it's curious. I don't have an explanation for this still. I would like to figure out what it is. We're not the only ones seeing it. I know there's some other people out there on the internet that do some of this type of telemetry collection, and they're seeing similar types of behavior. So I don't know. Maybe one day we'll figure it out.
Somehow there's some communication to these 80,000 sources, and they're all doing the same thing at the same time. It'll be very interesting to continue to watch this and see what it's all about.
The other one that we had next on the list was port 8080. We've talked about this one as well. This is almost definitely, you can see there's a big uptick here on May 9th. It went from, you know, we had some smattering activity, maybe 5,000 scan sources per hour at peak. but it really dramatically went up to around 30 to 35, and it's been hovering around maybe 15,000 now since that May 9th timeframe. This is related to the GPON router vulnerability. There's a vulnerability that was announced for this type of router, and it coincides very well with when the announcement was made about that. It's a very easy to exploit vulnerability, so pretty easy for botnet operators to add into their malware to start looking for this vulnerability as well when it does its scanning. And there's a bunch of botnets who have actually done that. So this is a report from NetLab 360 back on May 10th. All these botnets they observed have instrumented this GPON vulnerability into their exploitation framework. So
you got to constantly update your malware if you want your bot army to keep growing.
Right, to keep recruiting these additional types of devices that new vulnerabilities are discovered for. And the last one I thought was kind of interesting because I wasn't quite sure. I saw this, and it's been a few weeks since I've done the show. So this is pretty new activity, relatively speaking. On August 20th, we went from a very relatively low number of scan sources scanning for port 8081, which is frequently used as another like alternate web port, maybe for like an administrative console or something like that. And we went from, basically not much, less than 1,000 scan sources per hour, probably not even hundreds, up to 12, 13,000 now is what we're seeing. So when I looked at what we actually were getting in our honeypots, I was able to confirm, oh, I know what this is. So I mentioned here possibly related to HNAP1 exploitation. HNAP1 is actually an older vulnerability. I want to say maybe it's either a year, maybe even a little longer. It stands for the Home Network Automation Protocol. There's a family of D-Link devices that are vulnerable to this. It basically is kind of a little code injection in the header of the HTTP header when you connect to the device. But when I looked in our honeypot, I saw that, oh, here's somebody, and we actually saw quite a bit of these where they were doing a post to /HNAP1, and then in the SOAP action field, the header field that they're passing, they pass in a little backtick in the SOAP action, which says to do whatever's in here might be an instruction, and if you have poorly written code, it might actually execute this. So apparently some firmwares do, and you can see what they're doing. They're basically trying to go fetch some malware and then change it to executable and then run it. And I grabbed this. Actually, I scored up these. So I looked at what we were actually seeing in our honeypot. We had 66 in the past 5 days. We had 66 attempts with this Izuki.mips trying to be compromised against us. 16 of another one, which is NGYNX. There's a few other ones, Kinjiro MIPS. The only ones I was able to actually get were the Izuku and Kinjiro ones, which I thought were interesting names. Sound very Japanese to me. When I took that sample, they're both actually the same exact sample, ran it through VirusTotal. You get a lot of things in here that look like Mirai, Gafkit, LightHydra, Bashlight. More so, it looks like there's a lot of Mirai names. So the different vendors, they kind of try to figure out what it is. I see a lot of Mirai-ness there. So then my next step was, well, let's take a look at what's actually in this piece of malware. So I did really passive static analysis of it where I just looked at the strings inside here. And I egrepped it just because I already knew what I was looking for. But you saw this user agent was in the strings output, which says Hakai /2.0, which is interesting user agent. And then I saw one of the connect strings in here has Izuku in parentheses connected, probably says the architecture of the machine, the host name of the machine, some other things where it has the Izuku in there as well. So I Googled Hakai, and I realized that something slipped past my radar that I didn't see in my newsfeed. But I guess it was a few days ago, September 3rd, ZDNet reported new Hakai IoT botnet takes aim at D-Link, Huawei, and Realtek routers. And so it's the D-Link router that has this HNAP protocol vulnerability. So they mentioned in here, it's been instrumented to target the D-Link routers that's supporting the HNAP protocol. And then furthermore, the Hakai code base has made its hands into the hands of some other people. And there are a few variants named Kinjiro and Izuku. which are the names that
results,
we saw earlier. So, you know, at least we kind of closed the loop there on what this activity is around and it's about. So we know, you know, with some reasonable certainty that it's related to this family of malware, because we can see that it's trying to push it to devices. Anyway, that's all I really had for this week on the internet weather.
Thank you, John.
All right, thanks.